The NBA season has officially tipped off, which means the race for accolades, all-NBA honors, and a championship title are all underway. I've talked about the best teams in each conference already, as well as some of the major individual awards. I still might make some videos on the rest of them, but there's one in particular that I hadn't gotten around to just yet. But now that the season has started and players are coming out of the gates firing on all cylinders, it's about time I go over the race for the NBA's most valuable player. For the 2023-2024 season, I feel like there are 10 players who realistically will put together a campaign worthy of winning the MVP award. I think the best way to start going through that list of players is by distinguishing the names that are very likely going to be in the conversation all season long from the names that will likely remain fringe candidates. The 10 players on my list are Nikola Jokic, Joel Embiid, Giannis Antetokounmpo, Jayson Tatum, Luka Doncic, Anthony Davis, Shai Gilgeous-Alexander, Devin Booker, Zion Williamson, and Anthony Edwards. Was that 10 names? Jesus, it felt like way more. Anyways, those are the players I think the race will be between, varying degrees of likelihood as I said, but I would be pretty surprised if anyone else was consistently in this conversation. But nonetheless, let's get things moving and go over the fringe candidates. The players I think will have MVP caliber seasons but won't garner a considerable amount of votes are Shai Gilgeous-Alexander, Devin Booker, and Anthony Edwards. Starting off with SGA, who is hands down one of the most electric guards in the NBA right now, and last season cemented himself as a superstar level talent. As impressive as it all was, the Thunder were the 10th seed and full of young prospects, raw talent, and no real expectations, so someone had to be the guy that takes 20 plus shots a night. Granted, there's plenty of players taking 20 shots a game that aren't averaging 30 on stellar efficiency, but I think you can get my point. It's a lot harder to calculate the value a player has towards winning when their team isn't. This season, however, Shai stands a better chance at being a serious MVP candidate because the Thunder will be much better. With the development of Jalen Williams, Josh Giddey, and the presence of a rookie Chet Holmgren, OKC have a legit shot at being a top 6 seed in the West. I still don't think his case will come close to some of the later names who impact winning on much better teams, but SGA will be in the conversation. As for D-Book's case, the reasons why and why not are fairly simplistic. I pretty confidently believe Devin Booker is the best player on the Suns and will take on a bigger role as a primary ball handler. And the Suns are looking to be a dominant team this season, so it's a pretty straightforward recipe of lead guy on a really good team that's also putting up great individual numbers, all things Booker will likely do. As for why not, well, most MVP candidates don't have Kevin Durant and Bradley Beal. With so much talent around him, I just can't reasonably say his impact on winning will be greater than that of a Jokic, Embiid, or even Luka. I could also see his teammates generating some noise around the MVP discussion, particularly KD, and if you have multiple guys playing at that level, they kind of cancel each other out for this award. And the last player I think will have an MVP level season, but not be a serious candidate, is Anthony Edwards. Since entering the league, Ant's game has continued to flourish, to the point where it's pretty evident he'll be a perennial All-NBA player, and it felt like he was one of the only consistent positives for the Timberwolves last season. He even managed to claw a game away from the Nuggets in the first round of the playoffs and show the world that he is him. I think he's Minnesota's best player, or at least will be very soon, and we should expect this to be the start of his name being in MVP conversations for a long time to come. As for right now though, while I expect the Wolves to be better than they were last season, they might not even make the playoffs. The Wolves got lucky with how injuries kept the Pelicans much lower in the standings, as well as the fact that the Mavs just gave up towards the end of the season. With the West being as competitive as it's gonna be, and the fact that they barely made the playoffs last season, I just don't feel confident about the Timberwolves spot in all of this. I don't think Ant will have the team success to go behind his individual performances, and in addition to the fact that he's still quite young and a clear tier below some of the other names on this list, I don't think it's his time quite yet. Okay, so I lied earlier. I said I had fringe candidates and for real candidates, but I actually have a quirky little third category. This category is just for Anthony Davis and Zion Williamson, who unmistakably have the star level production to win the MVP award and are on very good teams, but are so inconsistently available that even on my hypothetical list where injuries do not occur, I still can't in good faith not make a distinction between them and the 5 remaining names. For Anthony Davis, if he played the way we all know he can, didn't so frequently disappear from games, and played the 65 game minimum, he would be a lock for an MVP finalist. It's clear AD's the number one option, or at least has to be, and I suspect the Lakers will have a fairly decent regular season run. While I don't think the Lakers will be as good as like the Bucks or Nuggets, that's not even the main detractor from AD's MVP case. This could change over the course of the season, and we'll reevaluate the MVP race throughout anyways, but right now, Davis is by far the least consistent player on this list, and that's including the young or unproven fringe candidates. Additionally, I think there's a greater chance than not that he doesn't play enough games to be eligible anyways, which I'm not even hating on him for. I'd rather win a ring than an MVP if I was in his shoes, but that means not taking unnecessary risks as a team, like having your best player go all out and try and win this award. So for all these reasons and more, while the potential is there for Anthony Davis to be a top MVP candidate, I don't think it's going to happen. And for Zion Williamson, it's kind of the same ordeal. His impact on winning is made abundantly clear by the fact that the Pelicans fall off the face of the earth every time he gets injured, and last season they were on pace to be one of the best teams in the NBA before Zion went down. The dude is simply a generational talent, and he has the stats and win shares to certainly make him a favorable candidate. Even if Zion didn't sustain a season-ending injury this go-around, I think it's more than likely that he plays in less than 65 games, so much so that I can in good faith say he has an equal chance as some of the other players. His body of work over the course of the season will probably just be too small in comparison. Alright, and that brings us to my top 5 finalists for the 2024 MVP award, and I'm gonna go in order, so starting with number 5, I have Jayson Tatum. Tatum's individual output and team success have MVP written all over them. But for very similar reasons as to why he was on the outside of the top 3 looking in for most of last season, within the context of the Celtics having been and remaining one of the very best teams in the league, his impact on winning cannot be compared to players like Jokic or Embiid. And the Celtics have even more quote-unquote star players now, so even if he ends up averaging 39 and 5 like he did last season, there's too many players on the roster with significant impacts on winning to be able to call him the MVP. I'm sorry Tatum, but you're sharing the floor with 3 all-star level players, 2 of which were all-stars last season, so I don't think you'll be bringing home the MVP award. At number 4, oh boy, this is a good one, I have Joel Embiid. Yep. Reigning MVP Joel Embiid will finish as the 4th finalist in the 2024 MVP race, per my infallible logic. All kidding aside, even though I am serious about this, I do think Joel Embiid is going to slip in the rankings for MVP this season. Not because he's going to fall off a cliff in terms of production or anything. I'm sure Embiid's going to have a pretty dominant regular season, but now he's going to get measured by MVP standards. This might be kind of hard to articulate into words because it's more of an abstract hypothetical than an observable theory, although to an extent it totally is. But basically the gist of what I'm saying is, when a player wins an MVP award, doesn't matter if they were consistently playing at that level already, but when they finally actually become the MVP, they suddenly become under way more scrutiny and are held to a level not previously held to, even if their circumstances haven't changed. Oh, look at that, not really complicated at all, who would have guessed? I'm sure most of you know what I'm talking about anyways, but either way, I think we can all agree, more than any other award in the NBA, the narrative behind a season plays a real part in who wins the MVP. All of this to say, if the following season after becoming the MVP is a test, somebody better get Joel Embiid the notes, cause his ass is failing. Again, I'm not actually trying to hate on Embiid, I'm just being toxic, but I very much believe this to be true. Let's take Jokic for example. After winning 2 straight MVPs, the media, who votes on these awards, basically drew a line in the sand and said, nope, sorry white boy, but you're not winning another one of these until we see a goddamn championship ring on your horse-loving hands. Also, the very fact that he won 2 straight already made it impossible for certain people to consider him, because I guess then he must be a top 10 player of all time or something. I don't know how the that works, but regardless, he was also heavily criticized for his 2 playoff runs after winning those MVPs, where he got knocked out in the first and second rounds. Cause, of course he did. He had no help. That's the entire reason he won those 2 MVPs in the first place. And none of this even matters. This conversation shouldn't even be happening. The MVP is a regular season award, and the playoffs don't matter. And yet, they do. Because why, my lovely viewers? The narrative plays a part. Okay, I need to take a deep breath before I pop a blood vessel, and apologies for the faint of heart for all the profanities. The reason why I'm saying all of this is because last year, Joel Embiid had a spotlight on him during the postseason that was brighter than ever before. And when people looked at him to follow up his MVP season, he came up short. Not only that, he specifically stunk when it mattered. as he has for several years now. But it didn't matter then because it was Kawhi's shot, and it was the bubble, and it was Ben Simmons' fault, and he wasn't the MVP. But now he is, and the public's opinion on him isn't nearly as high. And in terms of logistics, the 76ers are a nightmare right now. There's an ugly divorce with James Harden going on, and even if there wasn't, this team choked in the second round, and the biggest things they did over the offseason were sign Kelly Oubre and Patrick Beverley. Deeply unserious franchise. Now, you could definitely convince me to a degree that if Embiid is a rock like he always has been for Philly, during the regular season at least, and the team is noticeably worse from top to bottom, it could definitely warrant some MVP nods, not unlike our Serbian friend we used as an example earlier, but personally, I'm not sold. I think people are going to set expectations for Embiid that, through things that are both his fault and very much not his fault, he won't be able to live up to. Sort of a, let's see ye make it to the finals before I hear ye say ye deserve another MVP type thing. So yeah, I just spent a while yapping about that, so pardon me if the rest of the players are hornswoggled for time a bit in comparison, but I had to take a second and cook right there. Joel Embiid is a generational player, but I don't think he wins another MVP unless his setting changes. And finally, onto the top 3 finalists for the MVP award. At number 3, I have Luka Doncic. Luka is one of the few players in the league capable of being a walking 30-point triple-double, and in terms of statistical output, that would essentially be a shoo-in for a top 2 MVP candidate in any given year. He's one of the most talented players in the league, a generational playmaker, wow, I'm using the word generational a lot, but whatever, and he had a Hall of Fame-worthy career in Europe before he even turned 20 and stepped on an NBA floor. Luka would have absolutely remained in the MVP conversation last season if the Mavs hadn't completely ceased to be a competitive basketball club, but they're much better this season, or at least have had the opportunity to fill out the roster a bit more and are better on paper, so I think it's going to be harder to discount Luka and all the Luka magic things he does when his team is significantly more relevant. Yeah, but the Mavs are the 6th seed doesn't quite hit the same way yeah, but the Mavs are the 11th seed does, so I think Luka's going to have a fair shot. I do think his numbers will go down a bit if he's trying to make things work with Kyrie, so while there won't be a shortage of MVP moments for Luka, I do think the next 2 players are likely going to have just as impressive statistical outputs, if not greater, while being on much better teams. At number 2, I have Giannis.
Nah, bro. Who is gigantic onto Campedono? The only thing that's giant is his surname. 1, 2, 3, 4, 26. Oh.
I've mentioned it in previous videos, but I think Giannis feels a bit rejuvenated and is ready to go absolutely stupid. The Dame and Giannis pick and roll is going to be so deadly it'll probably violate the Geneva Convention, and Giannis could average 40. Alright, glazing a bit, my bad, but you get what I'm saying. The Bucks' offense has scaled back the share of responsibilities, leaving it mostly to Dame and Giannis. Chris Middleton is obviously there as a great third option, but with him getting older and having a history of injuries, I'd expect his minutes to be managed pretty heavily, making whatever the Dame and Giannis 2-man punch is on any given possession that much more important. So I think the Bucks will be incredible this season, and Giannis will be at the center of that offense, along with Damian Lillard, of course. And with the departure of Drew Holiday, he's also probably going to need to step it up a bit on the defensive end too. If everything goes according to plan, I really like Giannis' case here, but as you can tell, there's one player I feel a bit stronger about. Meaning my MVP for the 2023-2024 NBA season is Nikola Jokic. What is there to say, really? He's the best player in the NBA right now on, at the very least, the best team in his conference, putting up video game numbers. What more could you want, right? I think the public opinion on Jokic is going to be considerably higher than it was last season. He's no longer the reigning MVP, which will make it easier for some folks who are just getting too caught up in the narrative around him winning 3 in a row, and he's also coming off of a legitimately historic playoff run. In fact, the reigning MVP fizzled out on the same stage, so perhaps there's a whole group of people thinking, perhaps I judged you too harshly, horseman, and they'd be more willing to appreciate the things he does. I think the Nuggets have a really good chance at being the number 1 seed in the West again, which, when talking about the MVP discussion, the margins are going to be so small that maybe having the actual first seed is what does it for some voters. He's the engine of that offense, an underrated defender, and while the Nuggets are ridiculously well-rounded, and I think Jamal Murray gets underappreciated because of his regular season stats, there's no true second star. There's a good chance Murray does become a first-time All-Star this season, but there's no Kyrie or Dame in the case of Jokic's peers, so if you really want, you could say he has less help or whatever. So yeah, that's my pick for the 2024 MVP. If you disagree with my list, or its order, or my reasonings, I hope you made it through without triggering an aneurysm. But with all that being said, I hope you enjoyed this video. Thank you all so much for watching. Enjoy the fact that the NBA's returned, everyone. I'll be back soon, but until then, take care.